These are some of the most disturbing films ever made in the form of an iceberg. We'll start with the more controversial and strange, and gradually move on to the truly traumatizing and illegal. I made this iceberg myself, and I think I'm scarred for life. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. At its core, the human centipede presents an idea unlike anything seen before in horror, and for very good reason. The story follows Dr. Heiter, an incredibly intelligent but twisted surgeon living in isolation in the German countryside. The doctor has an obsession that is as grotesque as it is unique. His life work has nothing to do with saving lives. Instead, it's about fusing them together. He dreams of creating a human centipede, and the true horror lies in the specifics of his idea. Dr. Heiter kidnaps 3 individuals and surgically connects them front to bottom, forcing them to crawl on all 4s. What makes it even more disturbing is the plausibility of the idea. Director Tom Six, who came up with the story, claimed he consulted with medical professionals to ensure the procedure could technically work and people could actually live like this. There are 2 other human centipede films, with each one of them being even more extreme than the last, with more death, gore, and a longer centipede. Human Centipede 2 was so extreme that for a time it was outright banned from the UK and Australia, that was later released with certain scenes cut. The Censored 11 are a group of cartoons created by the Warner Brothers during what's known as the golden age of animation. This was a time when studios like Warner Brothers, Disney, and MGM were creating some of the most beloved animated classics. But not all their work was made to stand the test of time. In fact, these cartoons were so controversial that Warner Brothers made the decision to pull them from circulation in 1968, and they haven't been officially released since. Why were these cartoons censored? The answer lies in their content. Unlike the whimsical adventures of Bugs Bunny or the stupid antics of Daffy Duck, the Censored 11 features extremely offensive stereotypes and caricatures of African Americans. One infamous example is the cartoon Coal Black and the 7 Dwarfs. While praised at the time for its fast-paced animation and jazz-influenced soundtrack, its content is more than shocking by today's standards. Black characters were often shown as lazy, foolish, or subservient, playing into harmful tropes that were more common in the 1930s and 40s. In some cases, the cartoons were particularly inspired by minstrel shows. The humor obviously wasn't clever or sophisticated, it was simply mean-spirited and degrading. Set in Sheffield in northern England, Threads follows the story of 2 families, the Kemps and the Becketts. At its heart are Ruth Beckett and Jimmy Kemp, a young couple with a life-changing decision ahead of them. Ruth is pregnant and the 2 plan to marry. Meanwhile, the United States and Soviet Union are on the brink of war after the Soviet Union invades northern Iran. But for most people in Sheffield, these events feel like a world away. Though that all changes when diplomacy fails. Tensions escalate into an all-out nuclear war, and Sheffield becomes one of the targets. When the attack comes, it's sudden, brutal, and utterly unrelenting. A flash of light, and everything familiar is wiped out in an instant. Buildings crumble, fires spread uncontrollably, and countless lives are lost in a matter of moments. Threads spares no details, showing the chaos, fear, and devastating loss as survivors struggle to comprehend what just happened. But the real horror lies in what comes next. The nuclear attack is just the beginning. The film dives deep into the aftermath. The government completely collapses, food supplies vanish, and medical care is non-existent. A nuclear winter plunges survivors into a fight for survival against starvation, disease, and radiation poisoning. Ruth survives the attack, but faces an unrecognizable world as she struggles to care for her newborn child, who is born with extreme mental deficiencies due to being exposed to so much radiation in the womb. One of the reasons Threads was just so controversial was its timing. It premiered on the 23rd of September 1984, during a period where the fear of a nuclear holocaust was at an all-time high in the UK. The film portrayed the government's responses as disorganized and ineffective, leaving the average citizen to fend for themselves in an apocalyptic nightmare. The graphic nature of the film also was extremely controversial. Audiences weren't prepared for the sheer brutality of what Threads depicted. Scenes of people being burned alive, dying from radiation sickness, and biting over scraps of food was so realistic that many viewers reportedly felt physically ill. From the moment Zero Day begins, you're pulled into what feels like a real home video. There's no slick editing, no dramatic music, and no indication that what you're watching is scripted. It's designed to feel like real found footage. The story follows two high school seniors, Andre and Cal, as they document their everyday lives. On the surface, they seem like ordinary teenagers, cracking jokes, hanging out, and talking about life. But as the camera keeps rolling, a slightly darker side emerges. In April 1999, two real-life high school seniors, being Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, carried out a meticulously planned attack at their school, Columbine High School. The event shocked the world, leaving 13 dead and dozens injured. What stood out, and what still haunts many, were the chilling details about the attackers themselves. Eric and Dylan had spent months documenting their plans, recording video diaries that came to be known as the basement tapes. These recordings offered a slight insight into their lives and motivations, a mix of anger, alienation, and a disturbing desire to leave their mark on the world. Now compare that to Andre and Cal and Zero Day. Like Eric and Dylan, they're two high school friends who feel disconnected from the world around them. They see themselves as outsiders, smarter than their peers, and deeply frustrated with society. As the film progresses, they record their thoughts, feelings, and preparations in strikingly similar ways to the real-life Columbine shooters. They plan meticulously, even testing their weapons and mapping out all of their attack. Though the similarities don't just stop there. Andre and Cal don't act like over-the-top villains or exaggerated stereotypes. They're eerily normal. They don't appear as monsters. They're people you might know. And in the film, much like Eric and Dylan, they go on to destroy their own high school. But where things get more controversial is the timing of Zero Day. Released in 2003, just 4 years after Columbine, the film certainly hit a cultural nerve. By that point, Columbine had become a symbol of a terrifying new era of school violence. Many critics wondered whether it was too soon to create a story so closely resembling the real event, as the film risked glamorizing the shooters by humanizing them. When The Exorcist debuted in theaters in 1973, it wasn't just a movie, it was an event. Based on the best-selling novel by William Peter Blatty, the film tells the story of a young girl named Regan, who becomes possessed by a demon, forcing her mother to seek help from two Catholic priests. But the reason it's on this list is because what many don't realize is that the horror surrounding The Exorcist didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. In fact, the most unsettling events happened off-screen, haunting the production and those who worked on it. The strangeness began almost immediately after production started. What should have been a normal shoot quickly spiraled into chaos, with a series of bizarre accidents and unexplained incidents that left the cast and crew shaken. The most infamous incident occurred early in production, when a fire broke out on set. Overnight, the entire soundstage for the McNeil family home, where most of the film's indoor scenes were shot, was destroyed. The fire forced the crew to halt production for 6 weeks as they rebuilt the set from scratch. Strangely though, amidst the destruction, one room remained untouched, Regan's bedroom, where the exorcism scenes were to take place. Even the crew, hardened by years in the business, found this detail deeply unsettling. William Friedkin, the director, was particularly unnerved. He reportedly brought in a real priest, Father Thomas Birmingham, to bless the set after the fire. The priest walked through the rebuilt soundstage, sprinkling holy water and performing prayers of protection. Though that wasn't the end of it. Accidents seemed to follow the production wherever it went. Ellen Burstyn, who played Regan's mother, Chris McNeil, suffered a serious back injury during a stunt gone wrong. In one scene, Regan, under demonic possession, throws her mother across the room, and to make the stunt look realistic, Burstyn was rigged to a harness and yanked backwards by crew members. But something went wrong, and the force of the pull caused Burstyn to fall awkwardly, injuring her lower spine. What's even worse is that her real scream of pain was captured on camera and was left in the final cut of the film. Linda Blair, who was the actor for Regan, wasn't spared either. The young actress endured several injuries during the physically demanding shoot. In one incident, the mechanical bed used to simulate Regan's violent thrashing malfunctioned, causing Blair to suffer a permanent back injury. But the accidents weren't confined to just the set. Strange and tragic events seemed to follow the cast and crew into their personal lives. One of the worst incidents involved Max von Sydow, who played Father Merrin, the priest leading the exorcism in the film. Shortly shortly after he arrived in New York to begin filming, Max received word that his brother had died unexpectedly. Other crew members and their families also experienced sudden and unexplained losses during the making of the film. In total, at least 9 deaths were linked to people connected with The Exorcist while it was in production. From actors' family members to set workers, the sheer number of tragedies only added to the growing belief that the film itself was actually cursed. We're now on level 2 of the iceberg. Megan is Missing follows 2 teenage girls, 14-year-old Megan Stewart and her best friend Amy Herman. Megan is the popular one, outgoing, confident, and always the center of attention, though she has a troubled home life and seeks validation through risky behavior, including meeting strangers online. Amy, on the other hand, is quieter and more reserved, often seen as the innocent one, and likes to record much of their lives on her camera. One night, Megan starts chatting with a boy online named Josh. He seems sweet, caring, and very interested in her, but there's a catch. Josh refuses to show his face on camera, claiming he doesn't have a webcam. Despite this huge red flag, Megan continues talking to him, and their conversations quickly become flirty and personal. Then, Megan, still ignoring all the warning signs, decides to meet him in person behind a diner. The next day, Megan is missing. The real horror begins when Amy starts to dig deeper. She records video diaries, expressing her sadness over losing Megan and her fear about what might have happened. Though soon, Amy becomes the predator's next target. The film's climax is horrifying and unforgettable. Megan's fate is revealed in a series of photos found on disturbing online forums. The photos show Megan being tortured in a dungeon-like room, with metal devices prying open her mouth and her mascara-dyed tears streaming down her face. But it doesn't end there. Amy, whilst trying to find her friend, is eventually captured by the same predator and is then locked in the same dungeon seen in the photos taken by Josh. Josh then assaults her and then informs her that she can leave, but only if she enters a large plastic barrel. Upon opening the barrel, Amy discovers Megan's lifeless body inside. Josh then forces Amy into the barrel with Megan, seals it, and subsequently buries it, leaving Amy to suffocate underground. Due to the characters being teenagers and the scene of Josh assaulting Amy being 3 minutes long, Megan is Missing was completely banned in New Zealand for very obvious reasons. The House That Jack Built follows Jack, a highly intelligent but deeply disturbed man, as he recounts the story of his life. But this isn't a normal autobiography, it's a confession. Jack details 5 murders, each more horrifying than the last, all while he describes his twisted philosophy on art, morality, and life itself. He doesn't just kill, he sees each murder as a masterpiece, a work of art that he's compelled to create. What makes The House That Jack Built so disturbing isn't just the violence, though that's certainly part of it. It's the way that the story is told. The film is narrated entirely from Jack's perspective. You're not just watching his crimes, you're listening to him justify them, rationalize them, even glorify them. The 5 murders, or incidents as Jack calls them, formed the backbone of the film, each one revealing something new about him, like his meticulous planning or his growing obsession with perfection. But they're also designed to shock you in different ways. The 3rd incident is probably the most unforgettable moment in the film. Jack invites his romantic partner and her 2 young sons on what seemed like an innocent hunting trip. Jack instructs the boys on hunting techniques, carefully explaining the importance of ethical practices, a moment of extreme irony given what's to come. As the family bonds over the lesson, Jack's true intentions begin to surface. From a concealed position, Jack coldly takes aim at the children and fires at both of them with a rifle, ending their lives instantly. The suddenness of the act is extremely jarring, but it doesn't end there. Jack drags the mother into his fantasy, coercing her into a picnic, as Jack puts it, where she's made to pose with the lifeless bodies of her sons. When the film premiered at Cannes Film Festival in 2018, it immediately caused controversy. During the screening, over 100 people walked out, disgusted by the graphic violence and how the film doesn't spare you any of the details in Jack's brutality. Some attendees openly expressed their outrage, calling it sick and torturous. But while some walked out in disgust, others stayed, and those who endured rewarded the film with a 6-minute standing ovation. In No Child of Mine, Kerry seems like any other 13-year-old. She's a British schoolgirl living in a modest home with her parents. But as you could have guessed, beneath the surface, things are far from ordinary. Her life is already turbulent, shaped by constant arguments between her mother, Linda, and her father, Jim. When her parents finally separate, it might seem like a relief, but for Kerry, it's only the beginning. After the separation, Kerry stays with her mother, hoping for some sense of stability. Instead, Linda brings a new boyfriend, Graham, into their home, and it quickly becomes clear that he isn't there to help. Together, Linda and Graham subject Kerry to relentless physical abuse. Graham outright her, and her mother also forces her into performing very illegal acts. Kerry can't take it anymore, and desperate for safety, she turns to her father, Jim, believing he'll give her the refuge she needs. But soon her hope is also crushed. Instead of offering her a safe haven, Jim betrays her in the worst way imaginable. Jim seeks to use his daughter for profit by letting truck drivers borrow her for a fee. Her teacher, Paul, becomes aware of her struggle and tries to place her in protective care, though the Crown Prosecution Service deems the evidence insufficient and the case is dropped. Kerry is then placed into foster care, where she struggles with behavioural issues as she destroys property, eventually getting her removed. She's then moved into a care home, where the cycle of abuse continues, where a social worker at the home starts to abuse her too. But finally, out of desperation, Kerry runs away for the final time and discovers a small, peaceful care home in a rural area. Despite initially being mute due to trauma, she gradually begins to trust the staff and shares her story. Although her abusers evade legal consequences, Kerry finally escapes the cycle of abuse. The film concludes by revealing that she pursues a higher education, and the film was based on a completely true story. This film is probably the only one on this iceberg with a slightly more happy ending, though again, I still don't recommend you watch it, as it's probably the most emotionally draining film you will ever see. When it comes to disturbing films, there are many that push boundaries, but few have left audiences as shaken as Concrete. It's a Japanese crime drama that isn't just extremely graphic, but there's a horrifying truth behind it. The film tells the story of a young woman's tragic fate at the hands of a group of teenagers. But to truly understand why Concrete is so disturbing, you need to know the real-life tragedy it's based on. The film is essentially a retelling of the horrific 1988 murder of Junko Furuta, a case that left Japan and the world in shock. Because it wasn't just a murder, it was a crime so cruel, so incomprehensible that it defies explanation. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old high school student from Misato, a medium-sized town in Japan. She was described as intelligent, kind, and with the dream to become an idol singer. But in November 1988, her life took a devastating turn. She was abducted by 4 teenage boys, one of whom had connections to local organized crime. And what followed was a 44-day ordeal of unimaginable suffering. Held captive in one of the boys' homes, Junko endured relentless abuse. The boys tortured her in ways so brutal that the details remain hard to even comprehend. They beat her, starved her, and burned her with cigarettes, and they forced her to endure acts of humiliation and violence that no one should ever have to suffer. Even as she begged for mercy, they showed none. What makes this even more horrifying is the role of others. The boys' families, neighbors, and even acquaintances knew something was happening but did absolutely nothing to stop it. Some were even complicit, turning a blind eye to the very obvious signs of abuse. After weeks of torment, Junko finally succumbed to her injuries. Her body was stuffed into a concrete drum and discarded as if her life had meant nothing. When her remains were discovered months later, the public's outrage was overwhelming. The crime led to massive media coverage about the failings of society and the justice system. Though here's the detail that will stick with you. Junko Furuta's murderers received shockingly light sentences for their crimes. Because they were minors, they avoided harsher penalties, and some were released from prison only after a few years. The injustice of it all added another layer of pain for Junko's family and the public, making this case one of the darkest chapters in Japan's modern history. Concrete really doesn't shy away from showing you the grim details of Junko Furuta's ordeal. The filmmakers chose to depict the events with an almost disrespectful level of detail, leaving very little to the imagination. A film that starts like any other low-budget horror film, but ends with something so shocking, so unexpected, that it leaves you questioning whether it's even legal to watch. That's the film Snuff in a nutshell. A movie whose ending transformed it from a forgettable exploitation film into one of the most infamous controversies in cinema history. Essentially, Snuff follows a group of women caught in a bizarre, violent cult in South America. These women are targeted by a Charles Manson-like figure and his band of devoted followers. The plot dives into the gruesome violence and chaos you'd expect from a 1970s exploitation film, with plenty of over-the-top gore and uncomfortable scenes meant to shock rather than entertain. For much of its runtime, the film doesn't stand out at all from the hundreds of others of its kind. The dialogue is clunky, the acting is terrible, and the production values are laughably low. But then there's a twist. Just when you think it's over, the screen flashes back to what appears to be behind-the-scenes footage of the film itself. This new footage seems unscripted, raw, and unsettlingly real. In this infamous scene, the camera lingers on a woman being brutally murdered by the film crew. It doesn't feel like acting. The effects, though cheap, are convincing enough to make you wonder, am I actually watching a real murder? The sudden shift from fiction to supposed reality is what made Snuff so unforgettable. For many viewers, it didn't seem like just a movie anymore. It felt like they had stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see, and that's exactly what the filmmakers were counting on. When Snuff was first filmed, it wasn't even called Snuff. It started as a completely unrelated film called Slaughter. Like many films of its kind, Slaughter was destined to fade into obscurity. But then something unexpected happened. Enter Alan Shackleton, a savvy producer and distributor who saw an opportunity to make the film infamous. Shackleton acquired the rights to Slaughter and decided to give it a makeover, or more accurately, a new ending. He hired a small crew to shoot the separate scene, a grainy, shaky depiction of what appeared to be a real murder happening on the film set. The marketing of the film was as shocking as the title itself. Posters proudly declared it was made in South America, where life is cheap. Shackleton's team leaned into the urban legend of snuff films, underground movies that supposedly feature real murders captured on camera. When the film was released, it quickly caught the attention of the public. Feminist groups, including Women Against Violence Against Women, led protests outside theaters condemning the film's apparent glorification of violence against women. Ironically, their outrage gave the film even more publicity. Shackleton knew exactly what he was doing. The controversy wasn't a side effect, it was the product itself. We're now moving on to level 3 of the iceberg. A film so convincing that its director was arrested and put on trial for murder. That's exactly what happened to Ruggero Deodato, the man behind Cannibal: Holocaust. Released in 1980, the film tells the story of a group of young documentary filmmakers who venture deep into the Amazon rainforest to capture footage of the indigenous tribes there. When they fail to return, a rescue team goes to find them and discovers their film reels, revealing the shocking truth of what happened. The plot might sound straightforward, but Cannibal: Holocaust is anything but. The movie is presented in a found footage style where much of the story is told through the recovered tapes. This format, rarely seen at the time, made it feel like an authentic documentary instead of a scripted film, as viewers left theaters wondering if they had just seen actual events unfold on screen. But it wasn't just the raw style alone that fooled people, it was the extreme lengths the filmmakers went for authenticity. Deodato pushed his cast and crew to act as if they truly had vanished. To keep the illusion alive, the actors signed contracts agreeing to stay out of the public eye for an entire year after the film's release. No interviews, no public appearances, nothing. To the world, they had disappeared without a trace. The group of young filmmakers had been brutally tortured and murdered by the uncontacted and barbaric tribe. One of the most controversial aspects of Cannibal: Holocaust was its use of real violence. Yes, the human deaths were staged, but the same can't be said for the animals. In multiple scenes, real animals were killed on camera, not with special effects, but with actual brutality. Perhaps the most infamous example is the scene where a giant turtle is killed by the characters in a lengthy, graphic, and disturbing scene. Crew members later admitted that filming the scene was deeply uncomfortable for everybody involved, but the director insisted it was necessary to create a sense of raw authenticity. But it wasn't just the animals, even the actors were subjected to extreme conditions for the sake of realism. In one scene, a woman's body is impaled on a wooden stake, creating one of the film's most iconic images. While it was a special effect, the setup was so convincing that it left audiences horrified. The actress had to sit on a bicycle seat hidden behind her with a piece of wood in her mouth to make it look like it was piercing through her entire body. Then, the unthinkable happened. Authorities in Italy, where the film premiered, launched an investigation. The violence and cannibal Holocaust looked so real that they suspected Deodato had orchestrated actual murders. The media exploded with rumors that the movie was a snuff film. The reason why I told you the detail of the actress sitting on the bicycle seat is because Deodato had to show how that stunt was done in court, as it just looked so convincing on screen to both the police and general audiences. In hindsight, one of the most funny moments of the trial was when the director had to bring his actors into the courtroom alive and well to prove they hadn't actually been killed. After its release, over 50 countries outright banned the film, making it one of the most controversial in history. When the Twilight Zone film was announced in the early 1980s, it promised to be a groundbreaking project. It was a chance to bring one of the most iconic, imaginative television programs to the big screen. Fans of the original show, which explored eerie, thought-provoking, and sometimes downright terrifying stories, were thrilled. John Landis, hired on to be a director, was also extremely excited. With the Twilight Zone film, Landis wanted to prove that he could do something even bigger and bolder, as he was making something unforgettable, though certainly not in the way he thought he would. Landis was given the chance to direct one of the film's 4 segments, titled Time Out. This segment told the story of Bill Connor, a bitter and racist man who, after a drunken tirade in a bar, finds himself trapped in a nightmarish series of time jumps. Each jump places him in the shoes of someone who has experienced the oppression he so casually dismissed. First, he's a Jewish man fleeing from the Germans during World War II. Then he's a black man about to be lynched by the Ku Klux Klan in the American South. And then finally, he's a Vietnamese man hunted by US soldiers during the Vietnam War. The story was meant to show Bill the pain and fear his own racism had caused others in history. For the climax of the segment, Landis envisioned a dramatic redemption arc. Bill would rescue 2 Vietnamese children from a war-torn village, risking his life to save them as explosions and gunfire erupted around them. The scene was meant to show Bill's transformation, a man who had learned the value of compassion through the horrors he had endured. But this ambitious sequence required a level of complexity rarely attempted at the time. It involved massive pyrotechnics, a helicopter hovering dangerously close to the action, and most controversially, 2 child actors playing the roles of the Vietnamese children. Landis's vision was bold, but his approach to achieving it would prove dangerously reckless. On the 23rd of July 1982, the pyrotechnics were ready, the helicopter was in position, and the actors were in place. The 2 child actors, Mika Din Lei, who was 7, and Renee Shin Yi Chen, who was 6, were hired despite numerous violations of California child labor laws. Not only were they working outside of legally permitted hours, but there were no permits to authorize their involvement in a scene involving explosives and helicopters. These decisions were made under the radar, with Landis and the production team disregarding the legal requirements to avoid any delays. When filming began, actor Vic Morrow, who's playing Bill in the film, hoisted the children in his arms and waded into the water as instructed. The helicopter, piloted by a seasoned Vietnam War veteran, hovered about 25 feet above them. Landis had insisted that the helicopter fly lower so that he could get the perfect shot. As the cameras rolled, everything seemed to be going according to plan, but then disaster struck. One of the large pyrotechnic explosions detonated too close to the helicopter, destroying its tail and causing the pilot to lose control as the rotor blades sliced through the air erratically. In mere seconds, it crashed directly into the river where Morrow and the children were standing. The rotor blades struck Morrow and Micah before crashing into Renee. All 3 of them would lose their lives. Many on set believed it was the direct result of Landis's insistence on pushing the limits. His demands for bigger explosions, lower helicopter passes, and tighter shots had overwritten safety protocols and was very likely the cause of their deaths. A Serbian film starts with Miloš, a retired adult film star living a quiet life with his wife, Maria, and their young son, Petar. His career is behind him, but the family is struggling financially. But then comes an offer that seems almost too good to be true. A former co-star, Layla, introduces Miloš to Vukmir, a wealthy and mysterious filmmaker. Vukmir offers him a starring role in what he calls an art film, promising a huge paycheck enough to secure his family's future. There's just one catch though. Vukmir refuses to tell Miloš what the film is actually about. At first, Miloš is hesitant, and who wouldn't be? But the thought of providing a better life for his family convinces him to accept the deal. He trusts that whatever the project is, it can't be too far outside his past experience. After all, he's worked in a controversial industry before, and how bad could it really get? Things start off strange, but just about manageable for our main character. Miloš is sent to a dark room where an actress performs a special act on him. Though taken by surprise, he looks up and sees a little girl watching the whole thing take place. This obviously disturbs Miloš, but then Vukmir invites him to watch one of his earlier recordings, and what he sees is beyond anything he could have ever imagined. A graphic scene of a newborn baby being moments after birth. Vukmir refers to this as newborn, a term that leaves Miloš horrified and sickened. He tries to quit right there and then, but Vukmir doesn't take no for an answer. Instead, he has Miloš drugged with a substance that clouds his judgment and leads him basically to become Vukmir's plaything. Under the influence, Miloš is no longer himself. He's manipulated into committing unspeakable acts on camera, acts that he would never agree to if he were in control of his mind. It's not until Miloš wakes up days later, confused and with no memory of what happened, that he begins to piece together the horrifying truth. He finds and watches the footage of what he was made to do, but he realizes that on camera, he had been forced to violate not just strangers, but people he deeply cared about, his own wife and son. The revelation destroys him, leading Miloš out of grief and not being able to live with himself any longer, to not only end his time on Earth, but the lives of both Petar and Maria too. The final scene delivers one last blow to the viewer. The scene begins with the camera lingering over the lifeless bodies of Miloš and his family as they lie together in bed. Then the silence is broken. A group of men enter the room. Their demeanor is cold and businesslike. These men, it's implied, are part of Vukmir's production team, and they aren't there to mourn the family. With one of the men unzipping their trousers, an instruction is then heard. Start with the little one. The meaning is painfully clear, as Petar, the youngest and most innocent, will now become the main prop of whatever horrific production comes next. In 2011, at the Sitges Film Festival in Spain, Angel Sala, the director of the festival, faced criminal charges after choosing to screen a Serbian film. Authorities accused Sala of exhibiting child simply because of the film's highly graphic and controversial scenes. For a time, it looked as though Sala might actually face serious consequences for his decision to show off the film. However, after further investigation, the charges were dropped and Sala avoided any legal penalties. The controversy didn't stop there though. During a premiere in Munich, Spasojevic, the film's director and one of the film's producers, found themselves in very hot water. Following complaints from audience members about the film's explicit and violent content, the pair was detained by local authorities. And the complaints were serious, as some viewers really believed that several heads had been cut off during the making of the film. Spasojevic and the producer were arrested and questioned, although they were later released without facing formal charges. Philosophy of a Knife isn't your typical film. It doesn't follow a hero, a villain, or even a clear plot. Instead, it drags you into one of the darkest chapters of human history and doesn't let you go for over 4 hours. The film is based on the horrifying real-life experiments conducted by Unit 731, a secret Japanese biological warfare unit during World War II. This group carried out literally unthinkable acts of cruelty, using humans as test subjects for diseases, frostbite, and even live dissections. These events alone are enough to make anyone uncomfortable, but the director doesn't stop there. He mixes the historical facts of the tragedy with more fictionalized horror. The entire film is shot in black and white, giving it the eerie appearance of a lost documentary. It's intercut with archival footage from World War II, making it seem all the more real. And these scenes of torture don't cut away or soften the blow. They are long, detailed, and brutally explicit. You'll have to witness horrifying experiments like their live dissections. And in the film, there's also scenes of forced infections, amputations, and other acts of human experimentation that are portrayed with a chilling sense of realism. The pacing of the film is another thing that makes it unbearable. Scenes drag on for minutes, often long past the point where most films would cut away. And obviously, this isn't a mistake. It's a deliberate choice by the director to make you feel the weight of time and suffering. Whether it's a prolonged shot of a victim's face contorted in pain, or the slow, agonizing depiction of an experiment, these moments are designed to test your endurance, and it's as if the film is asking you, how much can you take? Salo begins with 4 powerful men, referred to as the Duke, the Bishop, the Magistrate, and the President. These men represent absolute political and social power. Together, they plan to act out their most twisted desires. And to do this, they kidnap a group of teenage boys and girls and take them to a remote villa. And this villa becomes their own cruel world, where they can control everything. The victims are trapped with no chance to escape, and the men waste no time forcing them into submission. The film is divided into 3 chapters, or circles, inspired by Dante's Inferno. Each circle represents a step deeper into hell, as the abuse becomes worse and worse. The first chapter, The Circle of Manias, sets the stage for the twisted routine in the villa. 4 older women, called the Storytellers, are brought in to share their own disturbing experiences. They tell graphic, unsettling stories about their pasts, which inspire the captors to create new ways to torment their victims. The victims are then forced to perform humiliating and degrading acts, while the powerful men watch and sometimes join in. And at no point do the men show any empathy, only amusement at the suffering they cause. The second chapter, The Circle of Excrement, takes the abuse to a new, disgusting level. In this part, the captors force the victims to eat human waste, and this act is obviously meant to completely destroy their dignity and humanity. What makes this circle even harder to watch is how casual it all seems to the captors. As the storytellers continue their grim tales, the captors laugh and joke, acting as though nothing is out of the ordinary. The final chapter, The Circle of Blood, is by far the most brutal, as the men's cruelty reaches its peak as they torture and kill their victims in horrifying ways. And they treat the violence like a performance, merely for their entertainment. By the time the film ends, there is no hope, no rescue, and no sense of justice. The villa is a world of pure evil, controlled by men who see others as nothing more than objects. Countries like Italy, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway banned the film outright, labeling it as obscene and dangerous. Even in places where it was allowed to screen, it often came with heavy cuts or was relegated to more underground theaters. The graphic depictions of violence, abuse, and dehumanization were deemed too extreme for general audiences, and many governments saw the film as a moral threat. Ironically, Salo would become the director Pier Pasolini's final work. Just weeks before the film's release in 1975, Pasolini was brutally assassinated under very mysterious circumstances. His death added another layer of intrigue and controversy to the already notorious film. Some even speculated that his murder was connected to Salo, though no solid evidence ever emerged, and the case is still unsolved until this day. August Underground is not your typical horror film. Released in 2001 and directed by Fred Vogel, it belongs to a subgenre of extreme horror that pushes every boundary imaginable. But calling it a horror film might not even be accurate. Instead, it plays out like a chaotic montage of brutal acts, as it's a raw and horrifying look into the lives of 2 serial killers, filmed as if the audience had just stumbled upon their personal collection of violent crimes. The film doesn't follow a traditional storyline. There's no beginning, middle, or end, just scene after scene of unimaginable violence. And unlike most films, there's no explanation for why the killers are doing what they do. The film was made on a shoestring budget, and instead of using polished effects or professional actors, Vogel intentionally kept everything raw and unpolished. This unfiltered style was so convincing and horrifying that when the film was first released, some believed it was a genuine snuff film. In 2005, Fred Vogel, the director, found himself in serious trouble with Canadian authorities. While traveling to the Rue Morgue Festival of Fear in Toronto, Vogel brought copies of his films, including August Underground and its sequel that includes basically the same things, to sell at the event. But when Canadian customs officers inspected his luggage, they were alarmed by the film's content. The sheer realism of the films immediately made the authorities suspect Vogel of attempting to smuggle obscene materials into the country, a serious offense under Canadian law. As a result, he was detained at the border for nearly 10 hours while officials decided how to handle the situation. Eventually, the charges against him were dropped, but the ordeal wasn't over. Canadian officials sent the confiscated copies of the film to Ottawa for further examination, treating them as potential evidence of obscenity. Though Vogel was ultimately allowed to continue his trip, it just showed how polarizing August Underground was and still is. We are now on level 4 of the iceberg. Mai-chan's daily life follows a young woman named Miyako who secures a live-in maid position at a secluded mansion. At first, everything appears normal. Polished floors, pristine French maid outfits, and the promise of a stable life away from the chaos of the outside world. But as Miyako begins her work, she quickly realizes there's nothing ordinary about this place or the people who live there. The other maids, like Miyako, are there to serve, but their roles extend far beyond cleaning or taking orders. They are subjected to their employers' perverse and violent fantasies, forced into acts of submission and degradation far worse than Miyako could have ever imagined. Among the 3 maids, one stands out, Mai, as she is no ordinary woman. She possesses an extraordinary ability. Her body can heal from any injury, no matter how severe. This immortality might seem like a gift, but here it is her curse. Her employers exploit her regenerative powers in the most grotesque ways imaginable. Day after day, Mai becomes the unwilling centerpiece of their every desire, enduring acts of torture and violence that are all shown to the viewer in graphic detail. At first, Miyako was horrified. Watching Mai endure endless pain with no relief is a spectacle that should repel anyone. But the mansion has a way of warping those who live within its walls, and slowly, Miyako's resistance fails. Under pressure from her employers, she is persuaded to take part in the cruelty inflicted on Mai. One of the most infamous sequences involves acts of cannibalism. Her abusers literally take pieces out of her, consuming them as though she were a disposable source of endless food, which I guess she kind of is. But the film doesn't spare you any of the details. Every shot and every scene is extremely hard to get through, and the grotesque imagery is paired with a nonchalance. The characters around her don't treat her with pity or compassion. They see her as nothing more than an object for their entertainment, with the dehumanization of Mai being central to the film's shock factor. When Mai-chan's daily life was released, it was immediately controversial. Even in Japan, a country known for its tolerance of extreme entertainment, as I'm sure you would know if you watched my disturbing video game Iceberg, the film was met with outrage and disgust. Outside of Japan, the reaction was even more severe. The film was banned or heavily censored in multiple countries, deemed too graphic and too disturbing for public consumption. At first glance, The Birth of a Nation looks like an epic tale of the American Civil War and its aftermath. But if you actually watch the film, it's clear it isn't just telling a story, it's spreading a message, and a dangerous one at that. The film is divided into 2 parts. The first half shows the Civil War and its devastating impact on 2 white families, the Stonemans from the north and the Camerons from the south. It portrays their struggles, their heartbreak, and their losses during the war. This part of the film is dramatic, emotional, and carefully crafted to draw you in, though it's easy to forget what's coming next. The second half is where the true intentions of the film become clear. It focuses on Reconstruction, the period after the Civil War when the South was being rebuilt. But D.W. Griffith, the director of the film, doesn't show this as a time of progress. Instead, he portrays it as a nightmare. Black characters played by white actors in black face paint are shown as corrupt, violent, and incapable of governing. They're depicted as predators out to destroy white Southern society. One of the most infamous parts of the film is its portrayal of the Ku Klux Klan. Griffith doesn't show the Klan as the violent racist group we know today. Instead, they're painted as noble heroes riding to save the South from the chaos caused by black people. In one dramatic scene, the Klan charges to the rescue of a white family with dramatic music swelling in the background. This scene is designed to make the audience cheer for them, to see them as saviors. warriors, not villains. In another scene, a black character chases a white woman, trying to force her into marriage. She runs in terror and eventually throws herself off a cliff to escape. The Birth of a Nation also portrays Reconstruction-era black politicians as lazy, incompetent, and immoral. In one scene, they're shown drinking alcohol and putting their bare feet up on desks during a government meeting. Griffith claimed he didn't make the film to spread hate. He argued it was just a story, but the way he chose to tell that story reveals the truth. When Birth of a Nation was released in 1915, it was a phenomenon. Audiences flocked to theaters, with some traveling miles just to see it. It quickly became the highest-grossing film of its time, earning what would be equivalent to hundreds of millions of dollars today. But the film's success wasn't just about ticket sales. It had a ripple effect that would leave a stain on history. The most immediate and chilling fallout was the revival of the Ku Klux Klan. Before the film, the Klan had largely faded into obscurity, but Birth of a Nation made them seem heroic, even patriotic. Inspired by the film, William J. Simmons founded a new Klan in 1915, just months after the film's release. Simmons reportedly used the movie as a recruitment tool, showing it to Klan meetings to inspire new members. And by the 1920s, the KKK had grown into a powerful nationwide organization with millions of members. They marched openly in cities, staged massive rallies, and committed acts of violence and terror, all while waving the banner of their so-called heroic legacy as shown in the film. Even President Woodrow Wilson was caught in the controversy. After a private screening at the White House, he allegedly praised the film, calling it like writing history with lightning. Though historians debate whether he actually said this, the quote was widely reported at the time, giving the film even more legitimacy in the eyes of its supporters. Despite its controversial legacy, The Birth of a Nation literally revolutionized filmmaking, setting the standard for cinematic storytelling. At over 3 hours long, it was one of the first films to feature a complex narrative with emotional depth and multiple storylines, proving that films could be more than just mindless entertainment, that it could be actual art. When you hear the name Lucifer Valentine, it's hard not to picture someone who would make a film called Slaughtered Vomit Dolls. Valentine calls himself the pioneer of the vomit gore subgenre, a label as strange and grotesque as the films he creates. Honestly, to call this a movie almost feels misleading. Instead, the film is a fragmented series of graphic and surreal images loosely tied together by the main character Angela, who is spiraling into madness. And Valentine doesn't shy away from showing extreme violence, often lingering on scenes of bodily harm far longer than most viewers could stomach. The film also incorporates an unusual and highly controversial element: real vomiting. Multiple scenes show actors forcing themselves to vomit on camera, sometimes repeatedly. It's not just a fleeting moment either. It's a central theme of the film, appearing over and over again. What makes these scenes even more unwatchable is the way they blur the line between fiction and reality. While the violence is staged, the vomiting is real, creating a very grotesque mix of the truly authentic and the staged. Because you're not just watching actors pretend to suffer, you're seeing them physically endure something unpleasant. The story of Guinea Pig begins with Hideshi Hino, a Japanese manga artist known for his grotesque and shocking illustrations. Hino specialized in creating disturbing and surreal comics that explored the darkest corners of human imagination. But for him, drawing wasn't enough. He wanted to bring his twisted visions to life on screen. His idea was very simple: make films that looked so real people would forget they were watching fiction. The Guinea Pig series launched with The Devil's Experiment in 1985, a short film that set the tone for what was to come. There wasn't much of a plot, just a series of increasingly brutal tortures inflicted on a young woman. However, the second installment, Flowers of Flesh and Blood, is what cemented Guinea Pig as one of the most infamous film series of all time. Directed by Hideshi Hino himself, it was reportedly inspired by a letter he had received from a fan. The fan claimed to be a murderer and described in graphic detail how he had dismembered his victims. Hino turned this twisted inspiration into a film that would haunt audiences for years. Flower of Flesh and Blood depicts a samurai abducting a woman, drugging her, and destroying her piece by piece, all shown in excruciating detail. Using prosthetics, animal parts, and gallons of fake blood, the filmmakers created visuals so realistic that even horror fans accustomed to extreme gore were left shaken. It was as if the filmmakers had somehow captured real violence on camera, and that was the point. Hino wanted audiences to feel like they were witnessing something they shouldn't be watching. watching. And if you thought the Guinea Pig films were disturbing enough on their own, what happened in 1991 elevated their notoriety to a whole new level. This was the moment when a Hollywood actor, convinced that Flower of Flesh and Blood was a real snuff film, sparked an FBI investigation that would forever cement the series' legacy in horror history. The story goes like this. Charlie Sheen, known at the time for his roles in huge films like Platoon and Wall Street, attended a party where someone handed him a copy of Flower and Flesh and Blood. Sheen, curious about the tape, sat down to watch it, not knowing what he was about to see. What played before his eyes was one of the most gruesome and realistic depictions of violence ever put to film. The film's graphic content hit Sheen hard. As he watched the samurai systematically destroy the woman, he became convinced that it wasn't staged. To him, it looked like a real snuff film. Unlike most horror movies, this didn't have the hallmarks of fiction. No over-the-top acting, no cheesy effects, no escape for the victim. Sheen couldn't shake the feeling that what he had seen was genuine, so he contacted the FBI, reporting the film as potential evidence of a real murder. This call set off a chain of events that brought Guinea Pig into the spotlight like never seen before. The FBI, taking the complaint seriously, launched an investigation into the film, its creators, and whether or not it depicted an actual crime. As the investigation unfolded, the authorities zeroed in on Hideshi Hino, the creator of the film. Hino and his team were forced to demonstrate how they had created the film's disturbingly realistic effects. They showed behind-the-scenes footage and explained the techniques they had used to simulate the dismemberments. The animal parts used in some scenes were revealed, and the prosthetics were displayed as proof that everything was staged. Eventually, the FBI concluded that the film was indeed fake, an unsettling, convincing piece of art, but art nonetheless. However, by this point, the damage had already been done. The investigation had catapulted the Guinea Pig series into the international spotlight, making it infamous far beyond its original niche audience. We're now on level 5 of the iceberg. Snuff 102 is about the horrifying world of snuff films. The movie follows a journalist investigating the underground world of these snuff videos that show real murder and torture. Her search for the truth leads her to a deranged killer who forces her to witness and even become a part of the atrocities he commits. However, the film intertwines her story with footage of 3 nameless victims, showing their brutal treatment and ultimate demise all on film. But this isn't just a story about a journalist uncovering a mystery. It's a film designed to make you feel uncomfortable, confused, and even guilty for watching it, as the director, Mariano Peralta, really blurs the lines between fiction and reality. Unlike most horror films, which make it clear that what you're seeing is fake, Snuff 102 doesn't give you that comfort. It uses a mix of stage violence and real-life footage, including scenes of autopsies and real animal cruelty, to make everything feel disturbingly real. This deliberate choice forces viewers to constantly question if what they're watching is actually real or fake. The film doesn't offer much in the way of traditional storytelling either, as it's basically built off the back of extremely shocking and gory footage. There's no clear resolution, no satisfying character arcs, and no relief from the horror it shows. Even the editing feels unhinged, with jarring cuts and overlapping sounds. The director said in a 2013 interview that the film was never meant to be simple shock value. Instead, it was designed as a harsh critique of society's growing desensitization to violence. Peralta believed that by confronting audiences with deeply uncomfortable imagery, he could provoke critical thought and force viewers to reflect on why they would even ever think to watch a film like Snuff 102. When discussing how exactly he made the film, Peralta acknowledged the fine line he had to walk between creating realistic portrayals and maintaining ethical filmmaking practices. He clarified that while the film does incorporate real footage, specifically of animal cruelty he sourced from the internet, every human torture and murder scene was carefully staged using special effects and actors. Probably for the first time in film history, his goal was to craft a deeply disturbing experience that left viewers questioning what was real and, more importantly, why they were even watching the film. It's 1998 in Japan, a time when the country's film industry is thriving with creativity, but also experimenting with its dreams. The premise of Tumbling Doll of Flesh seems straightforward. It begins as a low-budget adult movie focusing on a man and a woman participating in what appears to be a consensual adult film shoot. The tone is mundane, with scenes that are slow, quiet, and uneventful. But as the minutes tick by, a subtle unease begins to creep in. Something feels off, not just in the performances, but in the very atmosphere of the film. Then, almost without warning, the story takes a jarring turn. The male actor begins to unleash horrifying violence on the woman. What starts as a consensual act devolves into an extended scene of torment, all while the cameras continue to roll. The violence is disturbingly realistic. It's not stylized or exaggerated, it's slow, methodical, and deeply unsettling. The camera lingers on the woman's suffering, refusing to look away, forcing the audience to confront every second of her pain. Unlike other extreme films, Tumbling Doll of Flesh doesn't offer any clear context or explanation for the violence. There's no character development, zero backstory, no justification, just pure shock value, leaving you physically sick. The director, Tamakichi Inaru, wasn't interested in creating a typical movie. He wanted to explore what happens when you strip away all safety nets, leaving only raw, unfiltered human emotion and suffering. His vision for Tumbling Doll of Flesh was a film that would feel as real as possible. So real, in fact, it would make viewers question whether or not they were watching fiction or something far darker. Just the title itself, Tumbling Doll of Flesh, is hauntingly appropriate. It reflects the woman's dehumanization throughout the film as she's reduced to little more than an object for the man's cruelty. The story of Faces of Death begins with John Alan Schwartz, a young filmmaker with a simple but daring idea. Schwartz wanted to create a film that explored humanity's darkest fear, death. To do this, he decided to make a film that felt like a documentary, filled with real-life horrors and unsettling footage. At the time, there was a growing curiosity about taboo subjects in media. People were becoming increasingly fascinated by things that were considered too shocking or forbidden, and Schwartz saw this as an opportunity. He developed the concept for Faces of Death as a mockumentary, a film that looks like a real documentary but blends truth with fiction. His vision was to create something that felt authentic, something that could leave viewers questioning what they had just seen. To achieve this, Schwartz and his team gathered a mix of content. They used a combination of stage scenes, authentic news footage, and even graphic real-life clips of death to create a film that felt disturbingly real. At one point, you might watch someone perform an autopsy, and the next, you'd see a staged execution that looked just as believable. The combination of the real and the fake made it nearly impossible to tell what was real. But Schwartz didn't stop there. He added one more layer to the film that would make it even more unsettling. A narrator. A fictional pathologist named Dr. Francis B. Gross was created to guide viewers through the movie. His calm, clinical tone made the horrifying images on screen feel even more shocking. One of the most infamous scenes involves a dining room, a group of people, and a live monkey. In the scene, diners gather around a table with a hole in the center. A monkey is placed inside the hole with only its head visible. The diners then take turns striking the monkey with small mallets before eating what becomes exposed. But the twist is, it was completely staged. The monkey was a prop, and the brains were actually made from a mixture of gelatin and food coloring. Though take for instance this next shot. A woman leaning out the window of an apartment building. The entire thing is on fire and she has no escape. She stares at the ground knowing the fall is too high to survive, but she has no choice. We then see her jump. The fall and subsequent death of the woman is in fact entirely real. However, the aftermath, the close-ups of her lifeless body on the ground, was completely fabricated by the filmmakers. All in all, about 60% of the film uses real, graphic, and horrible footage, and about 40% of it, while still disgusting, is completely staged, though you were never told which is which. In the early 1930s, Hollywood was in the middle of a revolution. Silent films were being replaced by talkies, which are just films with synchronized sound like you'd see in any film nowadays, and the possibilities felt endless. Audiences were no longer limited to imagining voices or sound effects. The screen was actually able to come alive like never before. But while many filmmakers were playing it safe in the studios, the Viking dared to do something that no one else had attempted. The Viking was not just another talkie, it was one of the first films with sound to be shot entirely on location, and not just any location. The filmmakers chose the freezing Arctic waters of the coast of Newfoundland. They wanted the film to feel as real as possible, capturing the harsh, icy conditions that seal hunters faced. This was an especially bold move for the time, especially since technology for recording sound outside of a studio was still in its infancy. The story itself was inspired by the dangerous lives of sealers, the men who braved the Arctic waters to hunt seal seals for their fur and oil. But the filmmakers weren't content with just telling a story. They wanted to immerse the audiences in the reality of it. To do this, they brought their entire cast and crew to the harsh, unpredictable Arctic. And it wasn't an easy task. The equipment they used to record sound was heavy and fragile, not at all designed for the sub-zero temperatures and the shifting ice flows of the North Atlantic. Still, the team pushed forward, determined to create something unlike anything the world had ever seen. Their ambition paid off in many ways, as the Viking was widely praised for its authenticity and gripping visuals. The filmmakers' obsession with realism had brought them face to face with danger at every turn. This relentless pursuit of authenticity would lead to one of the deadliest tragedies in film history. One of the boldest and most dangerous choices was to shoot many of the scenes aboard a real sealing ship, the SS Viking. At the time, sealing ships were rugged vessels designed to withstand the brutal conditions of the North Atlantic. These ships carried not only their crew, but also dynamite for breaking through thick ice. While this was standard practice for sealers, it added a massive layer of risk for the film crew unfamiliar with such hazards. The ship's captain and crew were real sealers, adding to the film's authenticity, but also exposing the cast and crew to the same dangers these men faced daily. It was March 15th, 1931 when the SS Viking set sail from St. John's, Newfoundland, carrying not only the crew but a dangerous cargo of dynamite and other explosives. These were meant to clear the ice and create a dramatic visual effect for the film. The filmmakers had used similar techniques earlier in the production, but this time the stakes were higher. The winter ice was thicker, the conditions harsher, and the crew more desperate to finish the job and just get out of the Arctic. Hours spiraled into days, and the ship navigated the treacherous ice fields, battling freezing winds and towering waves. Still, the crew pressed on, determined to capture the footage they needed. Disaster struck in the mid-afternoon. A fire broke out on board the ship, spreading rapidly through its wooden structure. It's believed that the sparks from a stove or lantern ignited the flammable cargo, leading to a catastrophic explosion. The dynamite stored in the hold detonated with such a force that it tore through the SS Viking, instantly killing dozens of people on board and throwing others into the freezing Arctic waters. Survivors described the scene as pure chaos. The explosion was deafening on its own, and the ship was engulfed in flames within moments. Those who weren't killed by the blast scrambled to abandon the ship, jumping into the icy waters or clinging onto pieces of debris. For many, the freezing temperatures proved just as deadly as the explosion itself. Hypothermia set in within minutes, claiming even more lives. Rescue efforts were hampered by the remote location and harsh conditions. Nearby ships and local sealers rushed to help, but for many on board the Viking, it was already too late. Of the nearly 140 people on board, almost 30 lost their lives, including Varric Frissell, the director of the Viking. Frissell, who had been so driven to capture the Arctic's raw power on film, paid the ultimate price for his artistic vision. But the story doesn't end there. Despite the disaster, the footage that Frissell and the crew had already captured was pieced together into a final version of the Viking. The film was released later that year and became a critical and commercial success. We are now on the final layer of the iceberg. To understand Snuff R73, we need to start at its beginning, or at least try to. Like many of the films this deep into the iceberg, this is very unlike a typical film, where the director, cast, and production team you can look to. Snuff R73 seems to have come from the very depths of the internet. No one knows exactly who made it, where it was created, or why it even exists. The first film surfaced in horror forums in the mid-2010s, a place where extreme films are shared by people looking for content that more than pushes the boundaries. The film itself is essentially a collection of real-life footage stitched together into something far more horrifying than any fiction. Many believe the film was created as a statement or a sort of challenge, as it could be designed to test how much a viewer could handle. The most infamous parts of the film involve children, as this is why Snuff R73 crosses every imaginable line. On the tamer side, it features real medical footage showing surgeries and procedures on infants and toddlers, and while medical procedures can be uncomfortable to watch under normal circumstances, the way this film presents them feels even more exploitative. There's obviously no educational value, it's only there for the shock value. Another notorious segment involves war footage, including injured civilians, and again, even children being caught in the horrors of war. Though the worst part of the film shows footage of an adult man severely harming a child. You can't comfort yourself yourself by saying it's just a movie, because it doesn't feel like one. It is real footage stitched together to create one of the hardest viewing experiences on the planet. MDPOPE, which stands for Most Disturbed Person on Planet Earth, might seem like an exaggeration or just a claim to grab attention, though it becomes clear that this series lives up to its name in ways that most people find difficult to stomach. The series is the brainchild of a mysterious creator known as Thomas Extreme Cinemagore. Thomas isn't a filmmaker in any sort of traditional sense. He's more of a compiler. Rather than shooting original footage, he scours the darkest corners of the internet to create a collection of clips that push the boundaries of what most people would consider watchable. The idea behind MDPOPE was to create something that would challenge even the most hardened viewers. It's been labeled as a shockumentary, a genre designed not just to disturb, but to test the limits of human curiosity and endurance. Just to give you an idea of how bad the film is, it includes real footage of accidents, executions, and other moments of extreme violence. Some of the most controversial clips involve severe and graphic abuse of animals, which many viewers find even harder to watch than the footage of real human deaths. The first film, MDPOPE 1, was released quietly online, gaining notoriety through word of mouth and internet forums dedicated to more disturbing films. Its sequel, MDPOPE 2, followed the same formula, but with even more extreme content. The creator, Thomas, has remained almost completely anonymous, adding another layer of mystery to the series, as why would someone dedicate their time to curating such horrific content? The Cold War was a time of fear and uncertainty. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were locked in a dangerous standoff, each capable of launching nuclear weapons that could wipe out entire cities. For ordinary people, the thought of nuclear war was terrifying. What would it even look like? How would you survive? These questions loomed over every household, especially in countries like the United Kingdom, which was seen as a very likely target in a global conflict. In the late 1970s, the UK government came up with an idea. They wanted to prepare citizens for the possibility of a nuclear attack, but they didn't want to cause panic. Instead of holding public meetings or creating dramatic TV campaigns, they decided to produce a series of short films called Protect and Survive. These films were meant to educate people on how to protect themselves and their families during a nuclear emergency. Though these films weren't intended to be shown right away, as they were designed to stay hidden until the government believed the nuclear attack was imminent. Then, in the days or hours before disaster struck, the films would be broadcast on television and radio, as the goal was to give people quick, practical instructions on how to survive. But Protect and Survive didn't stay hidden for long. The series was leaked to the public in the late 1970s, and when people first saw it, their reactions were not what the government had expected. Instead of feeling reassured, many were horrified. The cold, matter-of-fact tone of the films made the instructions feel more like a death sentence rather than a survival guide. For example, one film calmly explained how to make a makeshift fallout shelter using everyday items like doors, blankets, and furniture. The tone wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. People couldn't help but wonder, if this is the best advice the government has, what chance do we really have? The reason why I rank Protect and Survive in the very last tier is because just try to envision yourself in the shoes of its intended viewer, sitting at home, enjoying a very normal day, when suddenly this comes on your television, the last film you will likely ever see.
If anyone dies while you are kept in your fallout room, move the body to another room in the house. Label the body with name and address, and cover it as tightly as possible in polythene, paper, sheets, or blankets. Tie a second card to the covering. If, however, you have had a body in the house for more than 5 days, and if it is safe to go outside, then you should bury the body for the time being in a trench or cover it with earth, and mark the spot of the burial.
That concludes today's video. If you want something else to watch or listen to, here's a video of mine that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. Thanks for watching.